We've asked you what the word media evoke for you, and we came up with that word cloud, very nice colored word cloud. And the two words which strikes out are information and communication, which is what media relations are indeed, and what medias are. In communication, meaning an exchange between two entities, for example, you as spokesperson and the media, an exchange between the media and the general public, and an exchange of what? Exchange of pieces of information. That's what it is important, because your communication is made of some raw material, which is called information. So if we would like, if we want to define what media relations are, we could say it's a relationship that an organization develops with journalists, with the press. So in fact, your strategy is two-pronged. You got to try to connect with the media, but the media act as a go-between between yourself and the public at large, or the public, which is the real goal, in fact, behind the media relations. Now, the context is very particular. It has changed a lot over the past 50 years. Nowadays, we've got thousands of media outlets everywhere. We are connected 24 hours a day. It is also a very competitive environment because you've got media, thousands of media outlets helped by technology, and a very efficient technology like internet. But it's a competitive environment because the more audience you have, the more readership you have, the more listenership you have, the more money you get from advertisers. And that's very important, because money is the key for journalists to be able to do some reportage, to go in the field, to interview people, to travel, etc., etc. There's also another aspect, which is what some people call the public disaffection for the press, as there is a sort of disaffection for politics. And we've got a lot of debates going on about fake news, alternative reality, alternative truth, and real news, which is a bit difficult to define, but we are going to try to define it today, what real news are. And of course, in that world where openness, where transparency are becoming the norms, perestroika and glasnost, would say Mikhail Gorbachev back in the 80s, radio silence, stonewalling are not possible to do. So you have to speak, and you have to speak a very special language to try to attract media's attention. My method is very simple. By presenting to you how the press work, what challenges it faces, the various techniques used by journalists, I think you'll be better equipped to develop a meaningful relationship with the press. In short, you have to speak the language of the media, and it's a very particular language to which we are not really used to when we are not in the habit of writing like journalists. So today you are going to be sometimes spokespersons and sometimes journalists. You'll be answering questions, and you'll be writing questions and writing like journalists write. So how does the press work? Well, because of the thousands of media outlets, the news is 24 hours a day. It's around-the-clock news. I knew back in the earlier century, 20th century, if we take the example of the BBC, for example, it would shut down at midnight, and the programs will start again at 7 a.m. So, but it's impossible to do that. Today, you've got 24 hours news cycle. So it means that you've got many topics to cover on various disciplines and fields. And it's a fast moving cycle. Because it's a competitive environment, the news cycle is rather fast. And you've got to update regularly what you are printing, what you are putting on social media, what you are saying on radio or television. Then there is, for journalists, the problem of facts. Facts, as we will see later on, is a constant quest, and it often is impaired by several issues: manipulation, disinformation, disaffection, lack of time to check up your sources, to check up your news, wrong information, misunderstandings, etc., etc. Among other issues, I can quote as well financial issues, controversies surrounding the works of journalists, because some journalists have published wrong facts, and the independence of media organizations and media outlets. Now, if we turn towards the journalist, one might ask, what do they expect from you? Well, they want you to be what we call in the field of journalism a good customer, someone who knows how to speak, how to write, using a language palatable, understandable by the majority of people, using simple words, no jargon, no technical words, no abbreviations, no acronyms. Someone whose comments are concise, who is able to shorten an idea in a few words. Someone who can be creative when he or she delivers a message. Someone who is reactive to a news story or proactive in announcing an event, a project, for example, today's session. Someone who can suggest angles. We will see what it means, that little word angle, because this is very important when you write a story. Someone whose facts, whose stories are reliable, and someone with experience who is willing to engage in a debate, to exchange ideas, to confront ideas with other people, for example, when he or she is in a studio, a radio studio, a TV studio, and dialoguing, conversing with other people. And someone who has a good idea of what the media environment, being local, regional, national, or international, is. So let's do a little questioning with a histogram. You must, as I've just said, that to develop a meaningful relationship with the press, you must know the media landscape. So I would like to ask you which media you consult every day. Is it print? Is it social media? Is it TV or is it radio? So if you go to the following site, www.menti.com, and if you type the code 493115, you will be able to enter your answer in the boxes provided on that website. Without doubt, social media is the big winner of that little competition, which is quite normal. Because it's user-friendly, it's easy to use, and it's fast. However, there are some a few disadvantages of using social media. It's the fact that you have to update them regularly when you publish something. And also, if you take a media like Twitter, you don't have time to demonstrate an idea. You just put up your idea, your opinion, without demonstrating it, which is the advantage of the print, the radio, and the TV in that order, because you have more spaces, more time to develop an idea, to demonstrate an idea, and to illustrate an idea with some example. So now, what constitutes for a journalist a good story, a story in general? A dog biting a postman is not newsworthy. This is not a story, but a postman biting a dog is a good story. This is what constitutes a story for a journalist. Journalists hate to speak about trains which arrive on time. They prefer to speak about trains which are delayed or which are late at the station. This is what news is about. Otherwise, if you speak about trains arriving on time, you might be taken for the spokesperson of the railway company, which is not the role of a journalist. It's a bit different. And a good story has also other parameters, like, for example, timing. Timing is of the essence. If it's happening today, it's news. If it happened yesterday, it's no longer news. If it's happening tomorrow, well, it may be news, but you never know what's happening tomorrow. Significance. How many people can be affected by the news story or are affected by the news story? The proximity. When a story hits closer to home, it's newsworthy. And if it hits in another country, it's not as much as important as journalists would like to consider it. So for example, if there is an earthquake in Marseille, God forbid, it will be more important for the local media than if there is an earthquake in Scandinavia, for example. Then there is the prominence factor. When famous people are affected, if you are a car crash, this will not make the news headlines. But if the president has a car crash, that will make headlines. For example, I remember a few months back when the husband of Queen Elizabeth II was involved into an accident, it made the front page of every single newspapers in Britain for weeks on. And then there are also human interest stories, stories where the raw material of journalists, which is the human beings, are built into a real story. And if I take the example of radio, news bulletin on the radio, we have what we call closers at the end of a news bulletin, a story which is quickie, a bit different, original, amusing, funny, and that will end the news bulletin. This is what it's called human interest stories. Now, how journalists the situation, if, for example, a journalist is witnessing something, by interviewing people that can be close to the event or not. These people can be witnesses or experts or personalities, anyone, in fact, who is willing to speak to a journalist. And also by doing some research, because researching is one of the key elements of building a good story with some background, some facts, some context, some figures, etc., etc. The sources of a journalist are very important. They can be unique. You can have one source that has a lot of advantage. One of them is fast. You don't have to interview a lot of people, but it's one-sided. If we take the example of Richard Nixon's Watergate scandal in 1973-74, the unique source to the Washington Post journalist who revealed the affair was an insider, someone in the White House, someone close to the power. But the editor of the Washington Post had to really think carefully before publishing anything because he had only one source of information. Now, if you have various sources of information, it's time consuming because you got to interview people, you got to verify what the sources say, but the story will be more accurate. And that's also very important because accuracy is what a good story is made of. The angle. Any story you can think of is made of various sub-stories, and these sub-stories are called angles. If you want, one story a day is one of the various and thousand angles. It's a theme for the day. In an article, in a dispatch from a news agency or an article for a print paper or a piece on radio or TV, the angle is expressed in what we call the lead, the introduction of the article. I'll give you an example. You can see you've got two states, Michigan and Washington, are the latest US states to bring in strict measures to try and curb the spread of COVID-19. High schools and colleges are to halt on-site teaching, and restaurants are prohibited from offering indoors dining in Michigan from Wednesday. Indoor restaurant dining is also banned in Washington state, and gyms, cinemas, theaters, and museums will close. So the main theme is COVID-19, the health crisis. But the angle is this time Michigan and Washington implementing health measures. Tomorrow it may be something else. The day after it may be Europe. Then it may be China, etc., etc. So you got thousands of possible angles for only one story. This is why a story never ends. It will end at the last second of the last hour of the last day of the last month of the last year of this galaxy, because I mentioned Star Wars earlier. Now, if you would kindly use the chat box to answer the question below, that will be quite interesting. Suppose that your topic is marine diversity. It's a very vast subject. How would you, as a journalist, as an editor, approach such a subject? Give as many angles as you can think of in the chat box to see how many stories and sub-stories you could write about marine diversity. I'll give you a few minutes to do that. Well, you've seen how many angles there are so far. You know, I don't think it's 20, 30, 45. That's quite an impressive number. That's quite creative. So if you want to treat, to process, to write about marine diversity, you should think of an angle. Otherwise, you will be lost in the vastness of such a subject, okay? So it continues, loss of marine diversity and damage to seabeds, marine diversity for a better world, less fishes in our dishes, that's a good slogan actually, etc. Sustainable techniques in aquaculture, etc., etc. So you see, you've got thousands and thousands of possible angles. I have put some of it in the next slide to define what marine diversity is, the problem of pollution, geostrategic aspects, economical aspects, political aspect, the actors of marine diversity, NGOs involved into marine diversity, documentaries in the movies, for example, Al Gore documentary, personalities involved in marine diversity, examples, crisis, etc., etc. So angles are quite essential when you decide to do a story as a journalist. Now, another rule of journalism is what is called by the 5 W's plus 1 H. They include who, what, when, where, and why, plus how. This is a formula to get a complete story on any subject. If you master these 5 W's, this will be a good start for a press release, for example, or any news story to be as complete as possible at this time, for example. Who is it about? What happened? When did it happen? Where did it take place? Why did it happen? How did it happen? And how can be subdivided into how much or how many? Okay, so this is what the 5 W's rule is important in journalism. because that's when you interview someone, you want to get at least these 5 W's answers. So another little exercise on today's seminar will be asking you to go on the link which you can see on the slide, and you will see several slides. I would like you to fill in the slides with who is involved in today's seminar, what is today's seminar, where, why, when, how. And you can take about 10 minutes to fill in. Just don't write sentences, just words or a couple of words each time. You can go into as much details as you want. And if you fill in the slides with the 5 W's, you will have a complete overview of today's seminar. You have mastered really the 5 W's, which is quite nice to see, because it means that you clearly understand the way journalists work. And this is what I did on my table. The parties who deal with the participant, the human beings. So I have put some participants, but there could be other participants. It's a training session on media relations, where it's by link, Visio link, and it's organized originally by the Hôtel de Région in Marseille in France. Why? To better relationship between the program and the media, be it local, regional, national or international media, when it's the date, and you can put up the hours as well, and how you have several means, several methods. It's the theoretical approach with a PowerPoint, for example, plus some exercises, some documents, the Visio conference, and then you've got the how much, it's the financial aspect, how many 110 plus participants, and the number of hours that this morning's seminar will last. So this is a general overview of today's topic, today's seminar. After that, once you've done that, you have only to write sentences to do a complete story. You could add up a few pictures, videos, tweeted links. You could add up also quotes, and you will have a proper press article. So congratulations to everyone for that one. Now, there is also another technique which is called the inverted pyramid. It's the structure of a press story. The most important information is at the top of the story, and the least important is at the bottom. But for a journalist, as I said earlier, for an article to be newsworthy, it's got to be today's news. So what we mean by important story is the most recent story to the less recent story. So if we were to speak about today's seminar, we would start by saying Olivier Jacoulet had just asked us to do a little exercise on the 5 W's. That would be the start of the story. And it will end, for example, by the seminar started this morning at 9 o'clock with the moderator explaining the house rules. And you see that the most important story is the most recent one, the less important story is the less recent one. By importance, we mean time frame, we mean the day, we mean the hour. And so if we take the inverted pyramid at the start, on the lead, or the introduction, if you prefer, we've got the 5 W's. This is the answer to the main angle of the story. Then you've got the body of the story in which you are going to give more details about the 5 W's. You are including possible arguments, possible controversies. You will put up quotes by various characters, various people, various experts. And the last part of the story is called the tail. You will have background information, contextual news or pieces of news. Now, suppose you have written such an article with the lead, the body and the tail, but your article is too long. You don't have to think a lot where to cut the story. You will start by cutting the tail, and the story will still be valid. And if your article is again too long, you can cut the body. The remaining part, the lead, will constitute a news in brief, a short story with the essential information through the 5 W's. This is why the inverted pyramid is very important. And it was developed about 200 years ago and it is used everywhere in the world to build up a newsworthy article. I mentioned about earlier on fake news, alternative truth. Let me give you an example about a recent piece of news, the conflict in Ethiopia and with the Tigray region. It's typical of misinformation and lack of control, lack of checking up facts. Hundreds of Facebook users have been sharing the picture you see on the right-hand side of the screen, apparently showing what was called a downed Ethiopian military plane. One post read, Tigray special forces were attacked from the air. They have destroyed one fighter jet and killed lots of special force military. The fight is still going on. By that post, you can see that it is oriented. But there were no proof of the killing of lots of special force military. And when you did a reverse image research that you can do on Google, for example, you realize suddenly that that picture had already been used in July 2018 by an Iranian-run press TV report about a so-called Saudi warplane shot down in Yemen, where there is a war going on. And before that, in May 2015, Twitter post about a MiG-25, so a Russian plane, down near the Libyan city of Zintan. So this picture is a fake. This picture has been used for the past 5 years, and it's totally fake. This is why it is important to really check sources and to check the facts before releasing a story. And sometimes it is difficult. Now, what I would like you to do for the next 20 minutes is to do a 100-word story about today's seminar. But hold on a second. It's not today's seminar now. It's an announcement for this seminar. So think as if it was yesterday and you've been asked to write a piece for this morning paper edition on the seminar, which is going to be held this 1st of December. So you write the piece yesterday for this morning edition of the print paper. The story will be factual. You won't have time to do some research. You won't have time to do some in the field on-site reporting. You won't have time to interview people, okay? So it's factual. I would like you to try to use all the technical elements that we have seen so far regarding how to write an article and what is a news story. And ideally speaking, once you have written your 100-word story, think of a title, think of a catchy title, think of something which will attract the reader's attention and force him or her to carry on the reading of your text. So you have 20 minutes to do that exercise, and it's 9:53 until 10:15 or about. Is that okay with everyone? And then once you have written the article, we'll ask 1 or 2 people to read the 100-word story. Is that okay for everyone? And when I say 100 words, it's minus or plus 10%, obviously. Time's up. Thank you, everyone, for that hard work. Now, it would be good if someone would want to read his or her article of this exercise. Any taker to read loud and clear the piece of article you've just written? Alessandro, you say you are happy to volunteer. The floor is yours.
Okay. Good morning. I even turn on the camera. So the title is The Secrets of Media Engagement Revealed to Mediterranean Conservationists. And then the text goes as, with the goal of strengthening the communication skills of project partners and favoring relationship building with media partners, the Interreg-Med Secretariat will convene tomorrow a 4-hour training session with renowned communication experts, including Olivier Jacoulet. I even Google you. The meeting will take place online timely and informative session. The training is convened in response to a recent survey indicating that Mediterranean project partners are struggling to have their voices heard by the regional media and policymakers, and it is thus intended to close this knowledge gap in the Interreg community.
Well, thank you, Alessandro. If I may say a few words on what you've just said. I shall Google you, mate. Don't worry. And it's I like the title, though I would say it's a bit too long. But I like the idea of the secret approach to media, or some words to that effect. That was good. Your first sentence is far too long. The sentence opening the article is really too long. It's must be about 40 to 45 words. It's a bit too long. So you should shorten the sentence or divide it into two parts. Now, remember in the exercise, I mentioned the fact that you would write the article yesterday for this morning's edition. So the use of today and tomorrow has to be quite clear. You have to imagine beforehand that the article will be appearing on the print this morning. So you should say today. Again, you should say today rather than tomorrow. I like your explanation regarding the why and the context, which is quite good, and it finishes your piece because it is the contextual information. So a good story, just the style, which is a bit too long, and maybe you could have just put a real quote by someone, either Paolo or myself or Laura or whoever, or you could have invented a quote, but it's a good one. We just have a quick time from Florian. We would be glad to hear your piece if you can.
Yes, I can read it if you want.
Thank you.
So my article is Interreg-Med Press Relation Training, a big success. Yesterday, it is the 1st of December 2020, an online press relation training was offered to the communication officers of various Interreg-Med projects by the program. Olivier Jacoulet, a former BBC journalist that worked in Africa and North America, and Amnesty International spokesman who is now teaching journalism at the French University Aix-Marseille, gave the participants an interesting overview of what press relation entails, full of tips and practical exercises. The training aimed at giving the communication officers a useful insight of the journalistic world and how it works, to allow them to improve their communication with the press in relation with their respective projects. It was brilliant, said one of the participants. It really helped me understand press better. Press relation was the last of a 3-part training cycle, considered a success by its organizers and moderators. Let's see now how it will impact the Interreg-Med project's communication.
Oh, Florian, excellent, very good. A few points. you have understood clearly the inverted pyramid. You are a real Egyptian now, so it's quite good. It's not as factual as being asked at the origin when I ask you to do the exercise, because you've used several words. For example, a big success, interesting. So you are at the you are putting your own opinion in the article. What you should do is what you did with when you quoted someone saying it's brilliant, it made me understood how journalists work. This could be an idea or a trick to do a factual piece and quoting someone else, so that you cannot be accused of being at the same time a journalist and a spokesperson. So you see, that's the nuance. Okay, that's a bit of a nuance, but it's a good piece. Thank you very much, both, and thank you to everyone. I'm afraid that's all we have time for.
So now there were the question and answers, the first question, a Q&A part. So please, if you have any questions, leave it on the box, on the chat box.
I had one question by Anna. I'm trying to Anna Rotter, who has put up on the chat box a story, a comment regarding the importance of communication with the media, in particular in times of crisis like the COVID-19. And she says that the importance of communication with the media is also very relevant in these COVID-19 times to avoid mass panic and conspiracy theories. And she says earlier on that we should use simple language, we should communicate, we should be able to be understood by everyone, which is a very important aspect. Because when a specialist tries to explain his or her work, that specialist has a tendency to use the local, technical, scientific jargon he or she uses in his everyday task. When you write for the media, when you write for the public at large, you should try and be more. You should try and be simpler in the language you use. Don't use some abstract word. Be concrete. And if you have a difficult concept, I think you should use some analogy or image or concrete example to explain your idea. I think we have another one. Which are the steps to present our result? I assume that we prepare a press release. How long should that, and then contact interested journalists to prepare an article. All right. Christina, thank you for that message. To present, she says, which are the steps to present our results? I assume that we prepare a press release. How long should that be? And then contact interested journalists to prepare an article. Yes. First of all, what do you want to say? What is the news? Is it newsworthy or not? How many people will be impacted by your story, by your press release? Is that important or not? And then considering that and these factors, the newsworthiness, the prominence, the personalities implicated, the public, etc., what sort of human interest side is there in your story? Then you should prepare a press release. I can tell you something. We have studied how many seconds a journalist will spend on a press release. Usually it's 3 seconds. If the title is good, the journalist will read the first paragraph, you know, the lead where you've got the 5 W's. If the journalist is interested to do a story on that, he or she might contact you. But the best thing, so the time devoted to reading a press release is very short. So if you write a 2-page press release, it's useless. Write 3-4 paragraphs of a press release with respecting the inverted pyramid, the newsworthiness, the 5 W's, a quote, etc. And then you will have more impact. Then afterwards, of course, do call the journalist and ask him or her if she has received your mail in which you put the press release. In 90% of the case, the journalist will say, no, I haven't not received it. So can I send it to you again? Give me your address, give me your telephone, and then that's how it works. But think ahead, organize yourself, and do something concise and short.
There is a second question.
Yeah, 3 seconds. 3 seconds on the headline. After 3 seconds, if the headline is good, then the journalist will read the first paragraph. If the headline is unpalatable, boring, flat, well, the journalist will not read it and he will throw your press release into the bin. This is how it works.
There is a question from Borka about the length of a sentence, which should be kept short, but can it be too short? How to find balance between what sounds good and well written and the proper length?
All right. So it's an average. It's an average length. Normally, a sentence has to be read only once to be understood. If the reader has got to go back to the beginning of the sentence to understand it, it's wrong. So that's one thing. So the jargon, the technical words cannot be used. The acronyms cannot be used in that regard. Second thing, how long is a short sentence? A short sentence is 1 word. A long sentence is 40 words. An average sentence is about 20 words. But you can balance short sentences and long sentences. That's not a problem. For example, if you have a quote, the quote can be quite long. Just 1 sentence with someone talking for 10 seconds, which makes about 40 to 45 words. So that can be long. But as soon as you have that long sentence, think ahead and say, well, I should need to do a short sentence. And if you have 2 long sentences, break them. Break the sentences into 2 or 3 parts to make it more palatable and more easily to read.
There are 2 more questions from Manuela and from Mireia, MedCities. So if you don't have the number of the telephone number of the journalist, what should you do?
Okay, hold on a second. I'm reading first of all Mireia. Okay. Of course, I understand you have a very difficult concept to explain. Well, whatever the difficulty of a concept, you should be able to relate that concept in a plain language. So if you can't use a plain language, give an example on top of the language you are using so that it makes for the reader, it's easier for the reader. Paolo, you were saying, how can scientists manage to speak the language of journalists? Well, if you watch the weather forecast on TV every night, these are specialists and they speak the common language. So it is possible for a scientist to turn into a plain, palatable language understandable by everyone. This is what the weather people do every night on TV, for example.
Can I suggest one thing, just for our partners participating here? We have published 3 articles in the EU Observer after our recent conference. And you can read these articles and see how they converted very technical language into very plain, understandable language. It's very interesting to read. We can share the links for you to read those. And if you've assisted, if you watched the conference, you can really see how the work how it was done.
And I'll give you another example, if you allow me, Paolo. In English, we often use the passive form. Okay, robbers were arrested by the police. That's a passive form. Well, if you want to make a sentence which is understandable immediately, you should say, police have arrested robbers. This is the active form. Active is better than passive. This is an example of what style is.
Oh, we have some more. A few questions ago, there was Manuela asking if you don't have the number of the telephone number from the journalist, what should you do?
Well, it's very easy to find a number. Very easy to find a number. If it's a print journalist, usually you've got some telephone numbers or email. If it's a radio and TV, you can get the number of the radio station and ask for the journalist. And this is very important. And I think, Manuela, you are asking a very important question. You should build a database of journalists. We journalists built database on experts we interview regularly in our program. And it's very important to have that database with a contact number, an email, a website, a blog, etc. So that when you look for someone to speak to you, you can find that person quite easily. And this is the background work you have to do when you want to do some media relations, building a proper database of media contacts that you meet or that you know or that you don't know yet, but you found the number in a newspaper, on the internet, and this is how to work. Plus, there may be in your city where you are a press club, which is also a very important, to which you can subscribe. It depends on the fee, of course, where you can meet journalists, you can have conference, and you can have access to a media database. In France, it's called Club de la Presse. In many cities in France, you have this Club de la Presse. You pay a yearly subscription, and you can go there and meet journalists and build up on your media contacts.
By the way, I would just like to add to that we have a list of contacts from media that we have shared before with the communication officers of all the projects, and we can post that as well in order for you to, or we can give you in the post-event resources, we can send you this list. This list was to be a shared one in order for all of you also to upload your contacts in order for everyone to benefit from the contacts. I don't think there's any more questions.
Right. This is the story I wrote about about the article I asked you to write. It's a run-up piece presenting the conference. So it was written yesterday for this morning. You can see, I'm not going to read it. You can read it if I put it correctly. You can read it, and with a headline, and you can see that the structure of the inverted pyramid is respected because it starts with 2 days and it ends with the 2 previous meetings, as one of the participants mentioned earlier on. So this is the way of writing a piece, and there is a quote by a certain Paul Smith, a spokesperson of the group. I think I invented the quote, but I took the idea from several documents. So you'll have that. You have that run-up piece. I would like also to ask you to keep the story you have written about today's seminar, because we will need it to another exercise later on in the second part of this seminar. So what you should do when you want to build a relationship with the media, you should speak the media language and therefore respect the basic techniques: newsworthiness, angles, originality, the 5 Ws, inverted pyramid, concise, concrete, with examples to illustrate your point, including the concept. Be reactive or proactive. Reactive, that if a journalist asks you to react to a story, this is the way to react. Proactive is the piece you've just written, is to announce something, to announce a project. You should be able to give out reliable pieces of information using everyday words to be understandable by everyone. Don't use sentences which are too long. Don't use acronyms, technical words, or if you are obliged to use technical words or acronyms, do translate them into plain language. No grammatical mistakes, no spelling mistakes. Spelling mistake can be a legal problem if you spell incorrectly a name. Use some quotes and a hook. What we call a hook is an eye-catching or ear-catching sentence at the beginning of an article or at the beginning of an interview, of which I'm going to speak in a moment about. For example, this is some words you say and some words you don't. You say on the left-hand side. You know, sometimes you have that tendency to use abstract words, and I have tried to find a translation. So participatory approach can be changed or can be translated. Oops, I have lost my slide. can be translated by involving the public. Result uptake can be translated, although it's not very satisfying, by understanding the result. Cross-cutting approach, an approach integrated various parties. Also the legalese terms, with reference to, with regard to, on the subject of, accounted for, can be simply replaced by about, by the fact that, due to the fact that, for the reason that, in view of the fact that, owing to the fact that, can be replaced by because of. So these are little tricks of the trade to be to be simpler in the way you express yourself in writing or in orally. Words and sentences. I was mentioning earlier the use of active and passive form. The first sentence, tourism expenditure by Europeans aged 65 or over grew by 33% in the past 5 years. This is passive form. You just change it, change the angle, if you prefer, the grammatical angle, by putting the more interesting parties, the Europeans. Europeans aged 65 or plus spent 33% more on tourism over the past 5 years. And it makes the sentence understandable at once, not without this difficult way of doing a sentence by using the passive form. Acronyms, abbreviations, CIA, FBI, IBM, PhD are okay, although I'm not sure everyone knows the meaning of these letters, but we can say it's okay. But GOP, the Grand Old Party, which is the Republican Party in the USA, has to be translated, for example. Nor is AJPLE, American Journal of Plain Language Studies, okay? So you are often using NPAs, yes, NPAs, which can be translated, at least if you write a press release, if you use NPAs, do translate it instantly by marine protected areas. The same goes for Med area. Mediterranean area is also a translation for these little acronym or abbreviations. Quite important to do so. There was a sentence starting with, within the framework of the Interreg Med program. It can be simply said by in the Interreg Med program, okay? Transferability of results, the sharing of results, multi-level stakeholders, various partners, interested parties, various vested parties can be also some solutions to that initial sentence. Mainstreaming, integrating, liaising, contacting, linking, and the famous 4 helix actors, which I had trouble understanding. And I think you have to explain what it means, interaction between science, policy, industry, and society to foster economic and social development. Last but not least, I would like to mention the pitch. It's an attempt to get, which it resembles a hook. A pitch is an attempt to get the attention of a journalist or an editor or any media outlet interested in your news story, in your press release. Nowadays, pitches are sent by email, and that's very important because in the email, you've got 2 important elements. One is the subject line. And that's where you are going to put the hook, something which will tell or which will push the journalist to click on the mail to read your mail, in which you will have put the part of the press release. So if your subject line is not correctly written, the journalist will not open your mail. So pitches are very difficult to do, but once you've done it, once you master the technique, it's a good way to approach a journalist. Bad press releases are composed usually of long run-on sentences, rambling sentences, vague ideas, empty sentences, use of cliches, saying, for example, someone would never have predicted. Well, I don't know about that. You know, it's a generality. Do not oversell. Do not say a very innovative, cross-cutting, policy-driven methodology. You'd better show in what way that policy-driven methodology is innovative. And that's very important. Show always why it is important for the journalist. Demonstrate, in other words, your ideas. I have taken one press release before we go on further, which was written about Panoramed. There are a few issues regarding that press release. The title is very vague, and you should be more specific. I can give you a trick of the trade. Never write a title beforehand. Always write a title once you have written the press release. It will be easier. Then you use the word Panoramed in the title. Media will never know what it means. So it has to be explained in one way or the other. The second paragraph, you use a word like actions. These new Panoramed paper consists of stock taking of the actions. We would like to know what actions you are talking about. You use also the word recommendations in the last paragraph. What recommendation? And last, and also the third paragraph is a contextual paragraph. It should be at the tail of the press release. And last but not least, the photo. What does the photo mean? What is the relationship between the photo you are showing and the text? I have not been able to see the justification of that picture. So what you could do is use pictures that indeed illustrate your issues, illustrate your topics. For example, there was a photo competition regarding Interreg Med. Why don't you use some of the pictures? I've put the Facebook link. You could use some pictures which are directly related to the issues at stake, issues you talk about every day. This is the way to use pictures. And they have to be related to the press release, for example. Let's do an exercise, because we can, I think, carry on now with the next part of the session. Imagine you are part of the press service of your organization, and you are about to send a press release on today's seminar. Once again, we are using today's seminar as an example. One thing is missing, sorry, there's a mistake, is the thing which is missing is the headline, not the headline, headline. I would like you to take about 5 minutes, not 10 minutes, going to be too long. And you are, have seen fast thinking participants, which is quite good. I would like you to think of an attractive headline to talk about today's seminar. So be creative, engage the reader, as it were, be informative at the same time. Usually a headline is composed of between 3 and 10 words. And you can use the chat box to put up your suggestions. So 5 minutes to do that exercises. We've got some titles, headlines. MED projects are learning to communicate better. Yes, if I may react straight away, MED projects will not mean anything. MED has to be explained, especially in the title, which is the first thing a journalist will see. Effective impact of media and its stories. Yeah, but that's a goal, and that should be linked to today's seminar. So you should put some words, Carmen, before effective impact. For example, Interreg Med members at School of Media Relations. It's a good idea, except that Interreg Med members. The idea of being at School of Media Relations is quite funny, quirky. So I agree with that. Communication for sustainability in the shoes of a journalist. Why not? Although the two first words are very abstract words, but why not the idea of being in the shoes of a journalist? Julia, European funds are boring, not with today's training about press relations. That's a nice one, actually. That's a nice one, because it's almost an op-ed, you know, an editorial. Yes, it could be a nice one. It's a bit too long, but it's a nice one. I would say European funds boring, not with today's training about press relations. So you can suppress the verb to be. On the spotlight in today's seminar, Juan, yes. The secrets of media engagement revealed. The thing, yeah, why not? Why not? with the seminar, The Secret of Media Engagement. Yes, communication in the shoes of a journalist. Tips and tops communication to media. Yes, good. Reporters for a morning. Yeah, why not? We've got, yeah. Reporters for a morning. In Miria, you said media relation, how to attack journalists to the Interreg Med world, or to attract, rather to attack. Attack may be felt as a bit violent as a term. I don't know. We've got 14 new messages. Okay, Miria, you corrected, yes. They are good titles, actually. They are very good titles. They are good ideas. So the idea is to keep them as simple as possible. Don't use abstract words. Be concrete, you know, like using the metaphor of being in the shoes of a journalist. Everything you need to know about media relations, yeah, but you would have to put before seminar in Marseille or whatever, something to present the context. EU officers on the verge of creating interesting topics or interesting stories. Okay. Yes. These are good. I mean, generally, you get the gist of what a headline is. It's difficult to do a headline when you haven't written a press release, which I hope we can do in the second part of that seminar. But they are good ideas. So keep up the good work. Yes, excellent work. Yeah.
I think we can stop the exercise for the moment and go to the break.
So we are going to speak about interviews and media strategy. It's the second part of this morning's seminar. Although, as I said, we haven't got much time, so you will have more details in the longer version of this PowerPoint, which I will be finalizing this afternoon and send it to Paolo and Laura. All right. You have many tools. You have interviews, which I'm going to say a few words in a moment, as well as press conferences, but you also have press kit, etc. Everything will be detailed in the longer version of the PowerPoint, as I just said. Interviews and press conferences and social media, they are part of your media strategy, together with your press releases, the press kits, as well as anything you may write on social media. So a media strategy encompasses many elements, goals, objectives, as well as tools, messages, actors, budget, equipment, places, etc. Funnily enough, it's like the 5 W's: who, what, where, when, how, why. This is like the same. When you try to develop a media strategy, you should think in terms of the 5 W's. An interview, and I'm gonna give you the general framework of an interview, and then we'll see how it goes. We are going to do a couple of short interviews with some volunteers. So an interview is a very effective way to forward your message because it's oral in general and it's visual if you go on camera. But it's very effective because this is the immediate effect of oral, of speaking with a voice. There are 5 reasons why you should do interviews, why you should get on the train of interviews. First of all, it's news. You deliver news. You are the source of an interesting news, considering if it's newsworthy, of course, but it's part of the news cycle. Secondly, it's good publicity for your organization. It gives it some visibility. And some organizations which are not known may get some visibility if they accept doing interviews with the media, because interviews can be very stressful, as we will see. Transparency. You are, like any organization in societies, you are accountable to your work to the public in general. So by doing interview, you show some transparency, which is the norm, some openness. Another reason is the impact you may have on the society at large. You may have an impact on media, but the media are just the go-between. So behind the media, there is the general public, but also there are lawmakers, there are financial people, there are partners, there are stakeholders, there are sectors, industrial sectors, tourism sectors, economical sectors, etc., which you want to influence to change habits or to change way of working. Next and last, contacts. By doing interviews, you meet journalists. And there was a question regarding the telephone number of a journalist. Interviews, press conference are public events where journalists are invited. Use these events to collect information from the journalists. Ask them for their telephone number, their email, what subject they are working on. And of course, you can always do some research on Google about any journalist. So there are 3 steps for an interview: before, during, after. Before the interview, what do I have to do? During the interview, how to behave, what to answer, how to answer. What is the general attitude, behavior you should have during an interview? And after is the evaluation process by which you will be better next time at an interview after the first one. So it's a cycle. So you could imagine I'm asking you, calling you at your office, and I want to do an interview on the job you do, on what your program does. What are the activities of your program? You could ask the journalist several questions to be sure to understand what he or she wants and to be sure to be the right person to answer it. So what program, what radio, TV program, what social media is the interview for? Is it live or is it pre-recorded? I mean, some people are afraid of live interviews and others prefer pre-recorded interviews. Well, there are advantages and disadvantages. It's 2 sides of the same coin, really. A live interview will allow you to say whatever you want without being cut when you do the montage. But it's stressful because if you say something and suddenly you hesitate, you are not sure of the answer. So you can always ask the journalist, can we redo the question and I'll redo my answer? The journalist will say yes, because the journalist wants to have a good product. Okay, but at the same time, once the interview is done, the journalist might cut part of the interview. So you are less in control of the interview. Ask also if the interview will be by phone, by satellite link, which means that you will have to wear an earpiece, which is also not a very handy thing to have in ear, or in a studio. Okay. How long will the interview last? If it's a live interview in a studio, for example, how long will it last? Is it 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes? Because depending on the length of the interview, your message or your message will be different. If it's a pre-recorded interview, the journalist might say, oh, I'll come to your office and we'll do an interview. It will require about 15 or 20 minutes of your time. But out of these 20 minutes of your time, the journalist might use only 45 seconds to have a soundbite, for example. So it's quite important to know where you are stepping in. Who is the journalist who is going to ask you questions? Google the journalist's name and check his background. Check where he has worked or she has worked. Check where he has lived or she has lived. These are very important information for you to be able to interact with the journalist. What is the context? Is it an interview to react to a news story? Is it an interview to announce something, following, for example, a press release? Is it a follow-up to a news story? Ask these questions are also important. Now, if you do a studio interview, will there be other people with you, debating with you? In that case, get some information about these people, who they are, what they do, and think ahead of what sort of questions the journalist might ask, or the people might interact, or the people who are going to interact with you. And ask the journalist, what's the angle? Are you doing an interview on marine diversity? What's the angle? Because it's such a vast issue that you have to be specific, especially if it's a short interview. And the last question is, why me? What have I done? Always ask, why do you want me to answer? And you check if the journalist knows the reason why he or she wants to interview you. These are the questions you might ask before. Prepare yourself. By preparing yourself, you'll be more comfortable, especially if it's a live interview, a direct interview. Think ahead of the questions a journalist might want to ask you. Work with your colleague, rehearse with them. Ask them to ask you silly questions. Ask them to ask you difficult questions. So by rehearsing, like an actor, you will be able to feel at ease and be able to answer the journalist. If you have to go to a studio, arrive not on time, but arrive in advance, just in case there is an emergency on the way in and you are stuck into a traffic jam, for example. If you are doing the interview by phone or by video conference, be ready and arrive in advance just to settle the equipment and the technology. If you are doing an interview facing a camera, beg for some makeup. Beg for makeup. If you are in a TV studio, the lights are incredibly powerful, and they reveal every detail of your face, including wrinkles, dark circles, etc., etc. So the makeup will be essential. No Dutch courage. What do we mean that by? It's the courage that comes from the bottleneck. It means no alcohol. Never drink alcohol before an interview. Never, never, ever. Be yourself. If you need to drink something, drink water. It will calm you down. Breathe. It will help you face the interviewers. And just before, in the few seconds before the interview starts, quickly ask the journalist, what will be your first question? It will give you a few seconds to think of a hook, of a strong sentence, of an ear-catching sentence to start your interview with. During the interview, concentrate. If you go, I don't know whether you've been to a TV studio, but it can be very impressive. You've got several cameras, you've got the spotlight, several cameras, some of them moving by themselves, no person behind them. They are being controlled by remote, so it's quite impressive. If you have an exchange and a debate with other people or the journalist, don't get into a heated argument, okay? Keep calm and think of England. Just keep calm, be quiet, be responsible, be professional. People disagree with you, that's fine. Just by being calm, you will have more impact instead of getting all worked up by some questions you don't like. Non-verbal attitude is essential, apart from the makeup. Have an open face, don't be like that. Have what we call the sharing posture. You know, you are leaning towards the journalist. Use your hands to speak, because your hands are very important. They speak by themselves. They do accentuate the message you want to project, which is quite important. Short answers, 30 to 45 seconds usually is the norm. You can go to 1 minute, but don't do that too often. So you in 30 seconds, the number of words you can say is less than 100. So it's very short. Okay. Speak clearly and slowly, articulate your words, insist, do the intonation, be an actor or an actress, be the comedian you always wanted to be, and act as if you were on stage, because you are on stage in one way. Avoid jargon, technical words, especially orally. Avoid long sentences, rambling sentences, random sentences where people will not follow your thoughts. And be practical when you want to illustrate an issue. Use a concrete example. That will be very helpful to be understandable by the majority of people. And after the interview, you can straight away ask the journalist how it went, if you have time to do that, and the journalist will tell you something if it went well, or if one question was not really clear in your answer, for example. Ask for a copy of the interview. It will help you debrief with your colleagues, but have colleagues record your interview you're doing. I remember when I was at Amnesty International, we would do sometime 5 or 6 interviews a day. We were about 7 or 8 press attachés, and we would do 5 or 6 interviews every day. So we would record our interviews, and then we would debrief them with the head of the press service. And we would say, okay, this is not a good answer. This is where we should work on for next time, etc. So as to be better next time for the next interview. And obviously, get the media contacts you gain during the interview and pass them on to the press service of your organization for their database. All right, we are going to do a first exercise. I am a journalist, and the question I'm going to ask a volunteer from the participants is as follows. Can you present in a few words what you do? So you would have 40 seconds to answer. You have to be concise, to be concrete. You are not allowed to use jargon, or if you have to use a technical word, explain it immediately, translate it immediately. Use your voice, your upper body language, your face, and your hands. So I would like to know if there are any volunteer for that first exercise on interviews. And suddenly you hesitate, you are not sure of the answer. So you can always ask the journalist, can we redo the question? And I redo my answer. The journalist will say yes, because the journalist wants to have a good product. Okay, but at the same time, once the interview is done, the journalist might cut part of the interview. So you are less in control of the interview. Ask also if the interview will be by phone, by satellite link, which means that you will have to wear an earpiece, which is also not a very handy things to have in ear, or in a studio. Okay. How long will the interview last? If it's a live interview in a studio, for example, how long will it last? Is it 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes? Because depending on the length of the interview, your message will be different. If it's a pre-recorded interview, the journalist might say, oh, I'll come to your office and we'll do an interview. It will require about 15 or 20 minutes of your time. But out of these 20 minutes of your time, the journalist might use only 45 seconds to have a soundbite, for example. So it's quite important to know where you are stepping in. Who is the journalist who is going to ask you questions? Google the journalist's name and check his background. Check where he has worked or she has worked. Check where he has lived or she has lived. These are very important information for you to be able to interact with the journalist. What is the context? Is it an interview to react to a news story? Is it an interview to announce something, following, for example, a press release? Is it a follow-up to a news story? Ask these questions are also important. Now, if you do a studio interview, will there be other people with you, debating with you? In that case, get some information about these people, who they are, what they do, and think ahead of what sort of questions the journalist might ask, or the people might interact, or the people who are going to interact with you. And ask the journalist, what's the angle? Are you doing an interview on marine diversity? What's the angle? Because it's such a vast issue that you have to be specific, especially if it's a short interview. And the last question is, why me? What have I done? Always ask, why do you want me to answer? And you check if the journalist knows the reason why he or she wants to interview you. These are the questions you might ask before. Prepare yourself. By preparing yourself, you'll be more comfortable, especially if it's a live interview, a direct interview. Think ahead of the questions a journalist might want to ask you. Work with your colleague, rehearse with them. Ask them to ask you silly questions. Ask them to ask you difficult questions. So by rehearsing, like an actor, you will be able to feel at ease and be able to answer the journalist. If you have to go to a studio, arrive not on time, but arrive in advance, just in case there is an emergency on the way in and you are stuck into a traffic jam, for example. If you are doing the interview by phone or by video conference, be ready and arrive in advance just to settle the equipment and the technology. If you are doing an interview facing a camera, beg for some makeup. Beg for makeup. If you are in a TV studio, the lights are incredibly powerful, and they reveal every detail of your face, including wrinkles, dark circles, etc., etc. So the makeup will be essential. No Dutch courage. What do we mean that by? It's the courage that comes from the bottleneck. It means no alcohol. Never drink alcohol before an interview. Never, never, ever. Be yourself. If you need to drink something, drink water. It will calm you down. Breathe. It will help you face the interviewers. And just before, in the few seconds before the interview starts, quickly ask the journalist, what would be your first question? It will give you a few seconds to think of a hook, of a strong sentence, of an ear-catching sentence to start your interview with. During the interview, concentrate. If you go, I don't know whether you've been to a TV studio, but it can be very impressive. You've got several cameras, you've got the spotlight, several cameras, some of them moving by themselves, no person behind them. They are being controlled by remote, so it's quite impressive. If you have an exchange and a debate with other people or the journalist, don't get into a heated argument, okay? Keep calm and think of England. Just keep calm, be quiet, be responsible, be professional. People disagree with you, that's fine. Just by being calm, you will have more impact instead of getting all worked up by some questions you don't like. Non-verbal attitude is essential, apart from the makeup. Have an open face, don't be like that. Have what we call the sharing posture. You know, you are leaning towards the journalist. Use your hands to speak because your hands are very important. They speak by themselves. They do accentuate the message you want to project, which is quite important. Short answers, 30 to 45 seconds usually is the norm. You can go to 1 minute, but don't do that too often. So you in 30 seconds, the number of words you can say is less than 100. So it's very short. Okay, speak clearly and slowly, articulate your words, insist, do the intonation, be an actor or an actress, be the comedian you always wanted to be, and act as if you were on stage because you are on stage in one way. Avoid jargon, technical words, especially orally. Avoid long sentences, rambling sentences, random sentences where people will not follow your thoughts. And be practical when you want to illustrate an issue. Use a concrete example. That will be very helpful to be understandable by the majority of people. And after the interview, you can straight away ask the journalist how it went, if you have time to do that, and the journalist will tell you something if it went well, or if one question was not really clear in your answer, for example. Ask for a copy of the interview. It will help you debrief with your colleagues, but have colleagues record your interview you're doing. I remember when I was at Amnesty International, we would do sometime 5 or 6 interviews a day. We were about 7 or 8 press attaches, and we would do 5 or 6 interviews every day. So we would record our interviews, and then we would debrief them with the head of the press service, and we would say, okay, this is not a good answer. This is where we should work on for next time, etc. So as to be better next time for the next interview. And obviously, get the media contacts you gained during the interview and pass them on to the press service of your organization for their database. All right, we are going to do a first exercise. I am a journalist, and the question I'm going to ask a volunteer from the participants is as follows. Can you present in a few words what you do? So you would have 40 seconds to answer. You have to be concise, to be concrete. You are not allowed to use jargon, or if you have to use a technical word, explain it immediately, translate it immediately. Use your voice, your upper body language, your face, and your hands. So I would like to know if there are any volunteer for that first exercise on interviews. Anyone?
There's Borka. There's Borka as volunteer, and she's our national contact point for Montenegro.
Okay, Borka, kako site?
Oh, hvala dobro. Hi, everyone.
That's the extent of my language, sorry. Okay. So this is how it will work, Borka. I am going to ask you the question as if we were doing a real interview, and I want you to answer straight away, respecting the parameters I have just mentioned, okay?
Of course, yeah. I'm ready.
So, Borka, you are from the Interreg Med. Can you present in a few words, please, the work you do?
I work as a national contact point in Montenegro for the Interreg Mediterranean program. It means that I'm assisting Montenegrin institutions in implementing projects that belong to Interreg Mediterranean program, or as we call it, Interreg Med. I also communicate about the activities that we implement here, and I'm actually employed in the national authority for Montenegro, that's European integration office.
All right. Thank you, Borka, for that. You have answered in about 30 seconds. You had 10 seconds more. What you could have said is when you mentioned the word activities, you should have given an example. You see, you should go activities. Let me give you an example of an activity we have, blah, 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 blah. And you would have a complete answers with the background, what you've just said, which was fine, but it will have been more concrete, more palatable to someone who has no idea of the job you do.
Yeah, so not to make it too abstract.
Exactly.
I get it.
Yeah, be very practical, very concrete, and that, I mean, what you said was perfectly understandable. That was good, but when you illustrate something, as you said, like you said, it will give it a more palatable flavor for the audience.
I get it.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other person would like to jump into the arena? No? Okay, Julia. Excellent. So we do the same exercise. Try to take into account what we've just discussed with Borka. Try to put a concrete example in what you say. All right.
Okay.
All right. We have Julia David with us today in the studio, and the first question I'd like to ask you, Julia, is: can you explain to us in a few words what you do?
So I communicate about what Europe does in Europe and in the Mediterranean area, in particular in the field of tourism. So I'm in charge of working with the specialists of tourism sector and getting what they do on the field and explaining it to people who do not encounter on a daily basis the European sector. And so I use social media and newsletter and videos to explain the actions about tourism in the Mediterranean.
Okay, that's 45 seconds. That's perfect. The length is perfect. It's fine. I mean, I will accept it as an interview. But my second question would be, what would be my second question, do you think, Julia?
Maybe something more specific.
Exactly. I would ask you, can you give us an example, a more concrete example of what you do when you speak about the tourism sector, for example?
For example, we have the city of Valencia, which is installing sensors to count the number of people who visit the cruise port and the city center. And these counters are useful to prevent overcrowding in this city.
You see, it's perfect. That's 15 seconds. It's perfect. That would be a good interview with a good general presentation of the work you do. Plus, that is being illustrated by an example. This is what we want as journalists when we interview someone who can explain an issue and explain it in a concrete way. So that was very good, Julia. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Okay, let's carry on and continue on, for example, the press conference. So the picture you can see there is the press conference in times of crisis with the COVID-19, and it's a press conference by Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor. Okay, a press conference is a very useful tool. It allows you to gather media in the same place at the same time, which is quite, it's less costly and it's less time consuming. It will increase your impact among the media. It will allow you to spread your message more easily and more rapidly towards your targets. It's a good way to announce an important news, an important event that you are organizing, and it's also a good way to react to a news story. But there are limitations to a press conference. First of all, do not do too many press conferences, risk of media weariness. You risk to bore people, especially if the subject is not interesting or is not newsworthy. Let me rephrase that, especially if the subject is not newsworthy. Organizing a press conference takes time and it takes a lot of money. And it is something where you don't want to do too often, but you have to tease journalists to come to a press conference, to attract them so that they will join the press conference. Above all, in a press conference, journalists will ask questions which have nothing to do with the topic at hand. They can ask you questions on anything at all they want. I remember an NGO in France preparing for a press conference on hunger and poverty in the world. At the same time, there was a controversy in that NGOs concerning salary scales. And the journalists during the press conference asked several questions about that issue. Not the poverty and hunger issue, but the issue regarding salaries. So be prepared to be able to answer any other questions that are not directly related to your topic. And be prepared for that. Rehearse. You have to rehearse a press conference to know exactly what you are doing, what you are saying. There are usually 3 sequences. The first one is the preparation of the press conference, which is very time consuming. You've got to think of the guests, the speakers, the moderator or the moderators, if there are several, the reasons why you want to organize a press conference, the content of the press conference, the documentation you are going to give out to journalists, the room you have to book, the tools, the equipment, the research on the media, the invitation, etc., etc. That is time consuming and it can cost a lot. Second, during the press conference, you have to welcome the media, the journalists. Usually you offer them a coffee or an orange juice and some water, and you ask them to sign the sign-off sheets so that you can have some new updated information regarding the media. So on these sign-off sheets, you can have media organization they represent, name of the journalist, his or her telephone number, mobile number, mail, etc., so that you can update your database. And after, you evaluate the press conference. You evaluate it by recording the whole event. As we are recording this seminar, it's the same thing, because you can debrief afterwards and see what worked, what went well, and what went not so well. And then you have to do the media coverage, which is the press review of how the media reacted to your press conference, what sort of articles were written in the print, for example, what sort of interviews, etc., etc., etc. A few tips. When you do a press conference, be professional. You may have friends within the journalist gang, but during a professional activity, they are no longer your friends. Don't say, I am going to give you that information off the record. There is no off the record. If you don't want to say something, if you don't want something to be released in the public, do not say it, even at your best friend, at your best friend. Try and control the event from the beginning to the end. So the introduction of a press conference is very important. That's where you are going to explain the house rules, how the press conference will go. You'll write an introduction, okay, about the topic, but you'll say in the introduction, when you want to ask questions, please identify yourself and the media you represent. So that will be a help for you. And for example, we all use mobile phone. Well, ask them to put them on buzzers or on silent mode. And if they have to answer the telephone, a call, well, please, can you go out of the room to do so, so as not to disturb the proceedings? And rehearse the press conference when you can before doing the real press conference. I think there are questions. Yes. Yes, there is no, okay, all right. What I would like you to do now, let me try, I would like to mention rather quickly a few stuff about media strategy. A strategy is the art of war, basically. It's the management of an army in the field and how you position the soldiers, the infantry, the tanks, etc., in a campaign. That's the management, the strategical management. And outside the war field, it's a plan or an action or a policy in business, in politics, in organization, in media relations. The difference between strategy and tactics is very simple. Strategy is organized beforehand, and tactics is the adaptation of the strategy in case there is a change of plan. All right. Let me give you a quick example which I have lived. In 1999, in September 1999, Augusto Pinochet was arrested in London. In our media strategy with the Latin American service, we hadn't foreseen that event, obviously. So we had a media strategy on, I think it was 12 months or 18 months, I can't remember. And suddenly everything changed. Our strategy went down the drain and we replaced it by a tactic. And for the following several months, we had to answer interviews only on one subject in Latin America, that was Augusto Pinochet. So that's a way to adapt your strategy to the environment as it changes. I'll give you two other examples. In 1961, Peter Benenson, who was a lawyer in London, read in an article that several Portuguese students were arrested for raising their glasses for freedom. He was completely taken aback by the reaction of the dictatorship in Portugal. So what he did, he wrote an article in the Observer, which you could see there on the right-hand side, and the title was "The Forgotten Prisoners," prisoners that no one heard of. And in this article, Benenson asked the public, the general public, to write to the Portuguese dictatorship to have the students release. And it has such an impact that the article of Peter Benenson was reprinted in the world over. And Benenson said afterwards, and I quote, "It's the publicity function of Amnesty International that I think has made its name so widely known, not only to readers in the world, but to governments. And that's what matters." So you see, using a very simple tool, an article, the media, and the general public, Amnesty International was born. Nowadays, about 60 years later, Amnesty International is still using the same tool. The print, the words, you can write letters, the media, the print or the radio, television, or social media, and the public, who is a fundamental element in the media strategy of Amnesty International. So that one, 1961. About a century before, another man, a Swiss, called Henri Dunant, founded the Red Cross for about the same reasons. He went to the famous Battle of Solferino in 1864, and there he saw soldiers dying, agonizing for hours and days on. They were wounded, but couldn't be helped, couldn't be rescued. So he went back to Geneva and he managed to persuade the Public Welfare Society of Geneva to set up a committee to address the problem of relief for wounded soldiers. So that was the main idea. Then he wrote a book. Benenson wrote an article, Dunant wrote a book called A Memory of Solferino, which was at the time a real bestseller. A bestseller not only in Switzerland, but in Europe in general. And many governments participated in the creation of the Red Cross, which has become nowadays an international movement with millions of members. So in both cases, the protagonists used the word, a book, and the publicity around a book and an article to gain the interest of the public and to change things, because things have changed thanks to these two organizations. And they did it with much success. Amnesty International still exists. The Red Cross still exists, although we would prefer them not to exist nowadays. But I think they will be still in function in the years to come. They use the media to make their points. Through the media, they engage the public and the governments, as Peter Benenson would say, and the style is comprehensible. When you read the article of Peter Benenson, there is no complicated word, simple sentences, and Benenson was a lawyer, and all Amnesty International work is based on legalese terms, legalese words, which are explained in their press releases. The same goes for the Red Cross. And the title of the book for Dunant and for the article of Benenson are easy to understand, very few words and understandable by everyone. And in the media strategy, you've got the organization, the media, and the targets. Okay, we are running out of time. I want you to do a little a little exercise regarding Twitter. You remember the exercise you did on writing a story about this seminar. I want you to write a tweet about today's seminar. A tweet has to be catchy. It's not a boring headline. It's got to attract the attention of the readers, and some of the readers are journalists. So you can attract journalists and the public as well. So it's got to be catchy, it's got to be informative, and you are only allowed 240 characters. That's what you would need your word page to count the number of characters, including spaces. So it's quite short. So you've got about 7 to 8 minutes to do that little tweet and to release it on the chat box, for example. Or I don't know how Paolo wants you to do the exercise. Paolo, are you there?
Yes, that's okay. I think the box is quite fine for
right.
such a short content.
Okay, good. So I'll leave you till 7-8 minutes to do that exercises. Thank you. Well, whatever you want, Manuela, just to answer your query, who is tweeting, the Interreg Med or a participant? I think the participant would be best. How would you create a tweet in your daily work? All right, I think it's best. The aim is maybe to convince, well, that you have to decide for yourself, or just simply stating what you did this morning, what the seminar was about, okay? Because I'm not going to give you the solution right now, but think ahead. Think what a journalist could do with your tweet. Oh, Cynthia, that's a good idea, to put up happening now. Okay, so it's an ongoing story, you know, how to attract the attention of media on your project. Brilliant example to the, yeah, well, thank you very much for the compliment. But I think it's a good hook, happening now, you know, just in or breaking news.
I like the Sansolis one.
Sorry.
Sansolis one. The Sansolis tweet is learn to wear journalists. So sorry, because it jumps. Learn to wear journalist glasses today with Interreg to-dos and not to-dos. Yeah, it's more do's and don'ts, no? The expression.
Yeah, I like it. The do's and the don'ts. That's a good one. Yes. Something is, however, missing in your tweet, Sansolis, because watch my space and see what's next. Where is your space? That little complement of news or information will help the journalist get the story. Or you're talking about your Twitter space. All right, that's fine. Okay. Juan, do you think you knew all about media? Med reporters participate on the online training session next 1st December. Yeah, all right. You could say today. Okay, Juan. All right. Okay. I think I can show you what I have written if I found. Yeah. All right. There it is. There it is. All right. And I think what I was asking people is, when I said something is missing, it's just a link to either a website or a blog or your own organization website, and that gives the journalist another way of interacting with you, I think. My part of this seminar is over. I want to thank every one of you for the good work and the good participation to this training. We try to put many things into a very short time. So as I said earlier on, you will have a longer version of the PowerPoint with more details on hooks, on how to write a press release, etc., etc. Okay, so thank you very much to every one of you. I will stay online because I am very impatient to listen to the on-site invite Barbara, Constantino, and Anne explaining their experience, giving out their experience about media relation and the media work. Thank you very much to everyone.